I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you.
Step away from my dog.
He's not trying to hurt me. He's afraid.
Nora Ellis had worked at Lucian Ferraro's estate for 4 days when she emptied 3 buckets of warm water over the most feared Pitbull on the mountain. 1 second, she was hurrying across the service courtyard with the laundry sloshing against her knees. Trying not to think about the housekeeper who had already corrected the way she folded napkins. Polished silver and breathed in hallways where important men preferred silence. The next, the worn sole of her left shoe slid on wet stone. The buckets flew. Warm water and soap crashed over a broad gray dog with a scar across his muzzle and a chest built like a battering ram. The courtyard stopped. The gardeners froze beside their shears. 2 guards turned at the sound. A footman carrying Crystal halted so abruptly the glasses clinked once and then did not dare do it again. Tank stood in the center of the water, dripping, motionless. One scarred ear bent. Thick head lowered. Nora was on the ground with one hand in the soap, staring into the dark eyes of Lucian Ferraro's Pitbull. Tank weighed more than 80 pounds. Had a reputation large enough to double that in every retelling. And had once sent a trainer to urgent care after the man tried to drag him by a choke lead. People in the house called him dangerous when they thought Lucian could not hear. People in the city called him cursed when they thought Lucian could. Nora had seen something else the day before through the pantry window. The dog moving stiffly after sleep. The way he hesitated before climbing 2 shallow steps. The way his eyes tracked the groomer's metal chain long before the chain came near him. But that was before she soaked him in front of half the staff. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Tank's lips tightened, not back tight. His chest was lifting too fast. Water dripped from his jaw and pattered against stone. His weight shifted hard onto his front legs, as if he wanted to flee and attack at the same time and hated both options. Then a colder voice crossed the courtyard. "Back away from my dog." Nora looked up and saw Lucian Ferraro standing beneath the archway that led into the main house. He wore a charcoal coat over a black suit. No hat despite the thin winter rain, dark hair damp at the temples. 2 men stood behind him with the rigid patience of bodyguards who had learned that the most dangerous person in any room rarely needed help looking dangerous. Nora had seen Lucian only twice since arriving at the estate, once at the far end of the dining room, where 4 businessmen had fallen quiet the moment he lifted one hand, once from the upstairs corridor, where he crossed the southern terrace with Tank beside him and did not appear to touch the cold. She had expected a man like that to fill a house with noise. Lucian Ferraro did not. He made rooms remove it for him. Nora put one palm to the stone and tried to stand. Her shoe slipped again. Tank flinched, not forward, back. His nails scraped the courtyard as his body braced. A low sound came out of him, but it sounded less like fury than dread. "I said back away." "I'm trying," Nora said. Heat rushing into her face, that earned a brief shift in the silence. One of the guards almost coughed over a laugh and thought better of it. Near the stair, Celeste Marin, elegant, winter white, and dressed for a breakfast she had no intention of helping clean up afterward, tilted her head. "The new maid falls in fascinating ways," she said. "Yesterday it was the breakfast tray. Today it's the dog." A few servants lowered their eyes. Nora knew exactly what she meant. Yesterday she had rattled a silver tray hard enough to turn every head at the table. Nothing had broken. Her dignity had managed it by itself. Celeste had smiled and called the mistake adorable in the same tone people used for toddlers and small disasters. Lucian's gaze moved to Celeste. Nothing in his face changed. That somehow made her step back. Nora pushed herself upright carefully. Tank did not lunge. He did not bare his teeth. He stood low and rigid with the water streaming off his shoulders. Eyes fixed not on Nora, but on the groomer near the kennel door. The man had lifted a chain lid without meaning to. The metal clasp clicked once. Tank's whole body trembled. Nora looked from the clasp to the dog and forgot for one reckless second who employed her. "He's not furious because he's wet," she said. Lucian's attention sharpened. "No? He thinks someone's about to force him somewhere." A pause. "You reached that conclusion while kneeling in soap?" I had an unusually good angle. No one laughed except one guard.
And he turned it into a cough halfway through.
Lucian stepped into the courtyard. Tank glanced at him but did not relax. That, more than the growl, changed something in the air. The groomer lifted the chain a little higher. He needs to be secured. No, Nora said. The man stared at her. Nora pointed at the lead. That sound is what he's watching, not me. You've worked here 4 days. Tank's eyes cut to the chain again. His hind leg shook once. The dog, Nora said. Doesn't care how long I've worked here. Lucian held out one hand toward the groomer without looking away from Nora. Put it down. The man hesitated only long enough to remember who signed his pay envelope. He lowered the chain. Tank's breathing did not calm, but the sound in his throat eased. Nora glanced at the soaked dog, the cold air,
the water darkening the stone around his paws.
He shouldn't stay like this. That is not your concern, Lucian said. I made him wet. You did. Then let me make it less terrible. Celeste gave a small, incredulous laugh. Surely you are not considering trusting her with Tank. She can't cross a courtyard. Nora's face burned. Lucian ignored Celeste completely. Tank shifted his weight again, avoiding one rear leg. Lucian saw Nora see it. What else? He's sore, Nora said. Right rear. He's putting too much weight forward. Slippery stone, loud water, chain in a hand. People staring at him from all directions. If you wanted to design the worst possible bath for a frightened dog with pain in his hip. This is a very efficient system. The courtyard went still in a different way.
The estate veterinarian had mentioned arthritis to the kitchen staff that morning, while Nora scrubbed copper pans nearby.
She had not meant to overhear, but she had heard enough. And she had listened. Lucian studied her. And you believe you can do better? Nora looked at Tank. Water rolled off the dog's cropped shoulders in slow lines. His scarred muzzle twitched once as he scented the air. I think, she said quietly. I can do it without making him feel trapped. Lucian's gaze stayed on her another second.
Then he removed his gloves. What do you need?
10 minutes later, Nora stood in the old greenhouse washroom behind the kitchen wing with her sleeves rolled up and her pulse climbing hard enough to make her fingertips cold. She had asked for rubber runners on the floor, buckets of warm water, towels, soft cloths, and for the hose to be taken out entirely, no chains, no shut door, no crowd. Lucian had given her everything except privacy. Tank stood at the threshold with his head low, looking at the room as if it had personally offended him. Lucian waited a few feet behind. The groomer stood farther down the corridor. Celeste, despite being dismissed by implication and then by name, had found a new place to linger. He won't go in, the groomer muttered. Then he won't, Nora said. She set one cloth on the floor just inside the doorway and sat down with her back against a stack of fertilizer bags. She did not call Tank. She did not hold out a hand and make the mistake people made with frightened animals when they wanted to be liked quickly.
She simply sat, then she started humming.
It was 4 notes, repeated, low and unimportant. A shelter volunteer had once told her that frightened dogs trusted songs more than sympathy because songs didn't lean on them. Nora had found that true of some humans as well. Tank's breathing filled the doorway. She folded a towel, then another. Rain tapped softly on the greenhouse glass overhead. Somewhere behind the wall, kitchen staff clattered pans in a safer, brighter world. Celeste shifted. This is absurd. Lucian lifted one finger without looking at her. Silence returned. After a full minute, Tank placed one paw on the rubber runner. Nora kept folding. A second paw followed. His nails clicked once, then quieted as he reached the cloth she had left and sniffed it. That's fine, Nora murmured. You're allowed to inspect the management. Tank sniffed one bucket.
Nora dipped her fingertips in the water and let a few drops fall onto the floor. No spray, no splash. The dog watched, then looked at her. I'm starting with your shoulder, she said. Not your face, not the bad leg. Nothing surprising. She waited until his breathing dropped half a pace before she touched the cloth to his coat. Tank stiffened. Nora stopped immediately.
There. You get to say no. The dog's eyes stayed on hers. A second passed, then two. His muscles loosened by a fraction. Nora exhaled and tried again. She washed one shoulder, then the other, talking about things too ordinary to be frightening. She told Tank the cook oversalted the soup on Thursdays. She told him the left greenhouse latch sang in bad weather. She told him the pantry shelves leaned, but only if you trusted them too much. She told him old houses behaved like certain men, impressive from a distance. Stubborn up close, Tank stood still and listened as if the details mattered. When Nora reached his flank and felt him tense near the right hip, she changed angle without touching the sore place directly. No lifting, no twisting, no demand to balance on pain. He glanced back once, surprised, then let the warm cloth travel where it could without making him choose between hurt and panic. Lucian had moved closer without her hearing him. He remained in the corridor, arms folded, gaze fixed on the dog. Nora did not look up again until the second bucket. That was when her knee knocked the rim. Warm water spread across the mat. She slipped sideways. Tank moved before Lucian did. His body braced against her thigh, solid and immediate, holding her up with all the careless certainty of something much larger than sympathy. Nora grabbed his shoulder to steady herself and found herself bent over the chest of the animal everyone in the county claimed could not be handled. A startled laugh escaped her. "Well," she murmured, "that's humiliatingly kind." Something shifted in the hallway. Nora glanced up. Lucian Ferraro was smiling. Not the controlled social version men like him wore in photographs beside charity banners and public officials. This was brief, unguarded, and gone so quickly she might have doubted it if the change in his face had not been so complete. She finished the bath with pitchers instead of pouring, towels instead of scrubbing, when Tank was mostly dry. She sat on the mat and wrapped one towel over his shoulders like a blanket. The dog lowered himself carefully, stiff through the right hip, and placed his heavy head in her lap. No one spoke. Lucian finally said, "Tank." One ear moved. "Come." Tank did not move. Lucian's brows rose slightly. "Tank." The dog pressed his head more firmly against Nora's knees. The guard nearest the stairs looked away to hide what was happening to his mouth. Nora scratched behind Tank's bent ear. "I think he'd like a minute." Lucian kept looking at his dog. "He has never wanted a minute with anyone." Maybe nobody asked him first. That should have offended him. Instead, Lucian considered it as though it were worth keeping. 5 minutes, he said. Tank stayed 42 by evening. The real problem was no longer the bath. It was that Tank had made a decision. Nora left the main house after her shift with her coat buttoned to the throat, a heel blister forming, and the kind of exhaustion that turned even a 10-minute walk to the staff cottage into a negotiation. Winter fog blurred the lights along the drive. The mountains beyond the lake had vanished completely. The estate behind her glowed gold and expensive through the mist. She was halfway to her little stone cottage by the east wall when she heard paws on gravel. Nora stopped. Tank stopped too. She turned slowly. The gray Pitbull stood 6 feet away with a towel still draped crookily over his shoulders, like a disgruntled shawl. "No," she said. Tank blinked. "You live up there." In the giant palace with heated floors and men who say yes before anyone finishes a sentence. Tank came closer. Nora started walking again. So did he by the time she reached the cottage door. He was at her heel, breathing warm air against her wrist. "This," she told him, unlocking the door, "is called trespassing with confidence." Tank walked in the moment the door opened and took possession of the rug in front of her fireplace as if he had discovered it through inheritance. Nora set down her bag and stared. Of course, the most feared dog on the estate had excellent instincts about central heating. 15 minutes later, headlights crossed the curtains. Lucian Ferraro knocked once. Nora opened the door halfway. "He followed me," she said. Lucian stood on the porch bareheaded now, coat unbuttoned, as if he had come down the hill faster than the weather recommended. "I gathered." He looked over her shoulder. Tank did not raise his head. "Tank." "Nothing."
Come home. Tank sighed and turned his face more deliberately toward the fire. Nora folded her arms. He appears to have reviewed his options. Lucien's gaze moved through the little cottage. The second-hand table. The chipped blue kettle. The stack of library books on dog behavior and veterinary nursing beside the sofa. The socks drying near the stove because the radiator in the bedroom only worked when flattered. Nora suddenly hated that she cared what he saw. This is not appropriate, Lucien said. I agree. He's taking up most of the floor. His mouth shifted once. He has medication with his dinner. What kind? Carprofen. I can give it to him. You say that as if you've been doing it for years. I say that as if you're standing outside in the cold while your dog ignores you from my rug. Lucien glanced back at Tank. May I come in? The question surprised her. Nora had once been married to a man who considered every door open if he felt entitled enough. Permission had not been part of his vocabulary. Correction had. She stepped aside. Lucien entered. Wiped his shoes without being asked, and remained near the door as though he knew how big he looked in rooms built for ordinary people. Tank accepted his medication only when Nora set the bowl by the hearth and sat beside him. Lucien watched the whole exchange with a stillness more intense than movement. You've known him 6 hours, he said. Apparently that was sufficient for both of us, and for you? Nora looked up. What? My dog has moved in. You seem only mildly alarmed. I've had a stranger do worse in a shorter amount of time. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. Rosa, the cook, arrived with a container of beef stew intended for Tank and an expression that suggested she had already heard 3 versions of the story from the staff hall. 10 minutes after she left, Lucien was still at the table while Nora reheated lentil soup she had planned to eat alone. She did not offer him any until his stomach made a traitorous sound in the silence. He looked offended by his own body. There's enough for 2, Nora said. I'm not hungry. That sentence has never convinced anyone in a kitchen. He accepted the soup on the second offer and finished every drop. Tank slept between them. The next evening he followed Nora home again on the 3rd. He was waiting outside the laundry room before her shift ended. By the 6th, he had established a routine that ignored all known hierarchy. He slept by Nora's fire, shadowed her through the greenhouse corridor each morning, spent the afternoons dozing near the inventory closet while she worked, and returned to the cottage at dusk with the solemn purpose of a man reporting for duty. Lucien began appearing on the evening walk as if by coincidence. At first he spoke only about Tank's medication schedule, exercise limits, and the specialist in Milan who thought the hip could be managed without surgery if pain, traction, and restraint were handled properly. Then he started staying for coffee, then soup, then silence that did not feel empty. Nora's clumsiness, to her irritation, did not vanish just because Lucien Ferraro had seen her steady with a frightened dog. She still dropped a spoon when Celeste swept into the kitchen without warning. She still caught her sleeve on a door handle while carrying clean sheets past 3 guards who looked at everyone as if they were evaluating escape routes. She still rattled cups when someone laughed too loudly behind her. But Lucien noticed something before she did. Nora never fumbled medicine. Her hands did not shake while cleaning a cut on a gardener's palm. She moved calmly when Tank stiffened on the stairs, when the pastry chef burned his wrist, when the scullery maid cried in the pantry because her mother had gone into hospital. Under scrutiny, Nora came apart at the edges. Under need, she became exact. One afternoon Lucien found her in the supply room with a pencil tucked behind one ear and a small notebook balanced on a stack of detergent boxes. There are 28 bath towels missing from the West Wing, she said without turning. Not lost, moved. Also the kitchen ordered the wrong gloves again. Marco buys the cheap powder-lined ones and 2 dishwashers are getting rashes. Lucien looked at the page. Quantities, dates, stains that would not lift. Soap preferences by floor, which staff member was allergic to citrus cleaner. Which dog treats Tank rejected out of principle. You've been tracking this since your 2nd day. The detergent invoice was wrong. Why didn't you say something? I told the assistant manager, and he said the maid who dropped a breakfast tray should maybe master plates before auditing a house.
Lucian became very still. His name. Nora took the notebook from his hand. No. That was not a request. And this is not a firing offense. His eyes stayed on hers. What do you want then? She thought of 100 smaller humiliations.
The ones people handed out because they could.
The one someone her former husband had made look educational. I want the gloves replaced, she said.
And for one mistake not to erase every competent thing a person does afterward.
Lucian's expression changed by almost nothing. You already have that here. The answer landed harder than she wanted it to. She looked back at the shelves because looking at him had become less safe than it used to be.
The next day he offered her a separate paid position. Tank's care coordinator, household inventory oversight. 3 hours each afternoon, independent from housekeeping.
Nora asked for the terms in writing. Lucian leaned back in his chair. You don't trust me. I trust paper more than moods. Mine are famously stable. That is a sentence only powerful men believe. He held her gaze another second.
Then opened a drawer and took out a blank contract.
Write what you require, Nora stared. You want me to draft my own terms? You said you trusted paper. Make the kind you trust. So she did. Separate wages, fixed hours.
No aversive handling for Tank without medical necessity. Residence not tied to romantic or personal expectation. 7 days notice for employment termination.
No entry into her cottage without permission except life-threatening emergency. At the bottom, after a long hesitation, she added one more sentence.
My personal history will not be investigated without my consent unless immediate safety requires it. Lucian read that line twice.
You believe I investigate everyone. You're Lucian Ferraro. That isn't an answer. It's the city's answer. He signed the paper, no debate.
No wounded dignity, just ink. Their lives settled into routines neither named quickly enough to prevent them from muttering. Lucian knocked even when the cottage door stood open. Nora started leaving a clean towel beside the chair he chose on rainy nights. Tank slept with his head on one of their feet and changed allegiance by the minute, depending on who had recently offered meat. The first time Lucian admitted jealousy, it was because Nora had crouched near the stable fence to scratch the ears of Mabel, the groundskeeper's ridiculous little terrier with one tooth and the confidence of a dictator. Tank arrived, assessed the scene, and inserted his body between Nora and the terrier with all the grave moral outrage of a dog who believed fairness meant exclusive access. Mabel weighs 12 pounds, Nora said as Tank leaned harder against her knees. Lucian's voice came from the path behind them. Tank has never found proportion persuasive. Nora looked up. Are you taking his side? I understand him. Of course you do. Lucian's eyes held hers a moment too long. More than I like. The sentence stayed with her all evening. A week later, Dr. Eli Mercer came to examine Tank's hip. Eli was kind, competent, and annoyingly easy to laugh with. He listened when Nora described how Tank carried himself after sleep, how he hesitated before polished floors, how thunder changed his breathing before the first real crack reached the house. He wrote down her observations as if they mattered because they did. You've got the instincts for rehab work, Eli told her. You should train formally. My ex-husband would be devastated, Nora said. He thought the only thing I managed well was apologizing. Ellie's smile faded. That sounds exhausting. It was educational in all the wrong subjects. Lucian arrived from the terrace just as Ellie's hand brushed Nora's elbow while repositioning Tank. Is the exam finished? Lucian asked. Eli glanced at his watch. We started 8 minutes ago. Then I'm sure it can conclude efficiently. Tank was asleep on the mat. Nora looked at Lucian. Are you annoyed at the veterinarian? I dislike unnecessary touching. Eli removed his hand. His expression did something careful and professional. Later, after the exam, while Nora measured out medication in the cottage kitchen, Lucian said, he asked you to dinner. You were listening. He asked within 20 feet of my dog. That is not a recognized privacy law. Did you accept? Nora capped the bottle. Are you jealous of Eli Mercer? No, you answered too fast. I answer most things fast, not when they matter. Lucian went quiet. Nora regretted the words the moment they left. She turned toward the sink. Forget it. No? His voice was lower now. I won't. When she looked back, he was standing closer than before and still beyond reach, as if he understood the geometry of restraint better than most men ever tried to. I am jealous, he said. I disliked that he made you laugh. I disliked that he touched your arm. I disliked that he asked you to dinner in a tone that suggested he thought he had a chance. Nora's pulse shifted. Jealousy isn't love, she said. No. Lucian's gaze stayed on hers. But it is honest. That night Simon left a voicemail. Nora had not heard his voice in almost 5 months. It still made her shoulders rise before the words even formed. He had heard she was working for Ferraro. He hoped she wasn't embarrassing herself. Men like that, he said with the old patient cruelty, did not keep women like Nora around once the novelty of their helplessness wore off. She listened to the message twice, not because she believed him, but because old damage liked to prove it still knew the route home. Tank lifted his head from the rug and came to rest his chin on her knee. A knock sounded. Lucian stood outside with rain on his coat. May I come in? Not tonight, Nora said. He studied her face, then nodded once. Are you safe? Yes. Do you need anything? She wanted to say no and yes and something more complicated than either. Instead, she asked, do you ever hear someone's voice after they're gone? Lucian went still. Every day, he said. How do you stop? I don't. His gaze moved briefly to Tank behind her. I decide whether it belongs in the room. Nora looked down at the phone in her hand. Sometimes Simon still sounds like my own thoughts. Then borrow another voice until yours is louder. Whose? Mine. His answer came quiet and certain. Nora, you do not ruin rooms. You show people what was wrong with them before you entered. Then he laughed, giving her back the door. In April, the estate hosted a charity luncheon for a regional dog rescue. Celeste arrived in pale silk and expensive sunglasses despite the clouds. Photographers trailed to local officials across the terrace. Women with tiny dogs in jeweled harnesses laughed too brightly beneath heated umbrellas, while Tank refused to acknowledge any creature under 30 pounds. Nora had spent 2 weeks helping Eli design a low-stress quiet area for anxious animals, away from the music and flashbulbs. She should have been occupied. Instead, Celeste found her near the water bowls. I hear the Pitbull sleeps in your cottage now, Celeste said. How pastoral. Nora kept arranging the bowls. He sleeps where he wants, so do men like Lucian, Celeste said lightly. For a while, the old humiliation rose so fast Nora almost tasted metal. Then a waiter clipped the corner of the table behind her. One bowl hit the terrace and shattered. Every head turned. Celeste smiled. There she is. For one awful second, Nora was back in Simon's dining room with a broken glass in her hand, and his voice explaining to guests that some people generated disaster, the way other people generated warmth. I'm sorry, Nora began. Then Tank pressed against her leg. He had crossed the entire terrace from Lucian's side without hesitation, sat beside her, and leaned just enough to remind her where his weight was and where hers could be if she needed it. The trembling in her fingers eased. Lucian's voice came from behind her. Leave it. Nora looked up. He was not speaking to her. He was looking at Celeste. She didn't drop the bowl, he said. Celeste's expression sharpened. I never said she did. You laughed as if you had been waiting for it. Silence spread. Nora stood before Lucian could turn the moment into one more rescue. I can speak for myself, she said. He looked at her, then stepped back immediately. The movement gave the terrace to her. Nora faced Celeste. I am clumsy sometimes. That part is true. The crowd stayed still enough to hear the lake below the wall. My hands shake when people watch me like one mistake will explain my whole life. She rested one hand on Tank's broad head. But when something living is frightened or hurting, they stop shaking, so you can keep tracking the glasses. I'll keep track of what matters. No one laughed later. When Eli introduced Nora during the rescue presentation as the person most responsible for Tank's progress, she stood before 200 guests and spoke about fear being mislabeled as aggression, about choice reducing panic, about pain making animals seem disobedient when they were simply protecting themselves. Lucian stayed near the back, not beside her, not claiming the moment, holding it open. That night, she kissed him first in the library corridor after the guests were gone, and the music had thinned to echoes. He went still, completely still. "You can touch me," she whispered. His hand came to her waist as if asking there too. Their happiness, when it came, did not arrive grandly. It arrived in increments. Lucian repairing the cottage step after Nora nearly tripped, and then accepting her accusation that he had removed the house's character. Nora learning that he took his watch off before washing dishes, even though he insisted he was not helping. Tank carrying one of Lucian's gloves around for 2 days, and then pretending not to know where it came from. Lucian leaving before midnight because Nora was not ready for a man's clothes to appear in drawers that had only just begun to feel like hers. Then one Tuesday morning, everything split. Leo found a photograph under Lucian's office door. Nora standing outside the cottage with Tank beside her. A red circle around her face, 6 words on the back. "Every dog obeys the right hand." By noon, Lucian doubled the guards on the east wall. By 3, he had decided the cottage was unsafe. By 5, Nora returned from town and found half her life arranged in a private suite inside the main house. Her books on a polished shelf, her kettle beside an absurd marble sink, her coat hanging in a wardrobe that smelled like cedar and control. Lucian waited near the windows. "What is this?" Nora asked. "You'll stay here until this is handled." "What is handled?" He gave her the photograph. Fear hit first, hard and honest. Anger followed so quickly it almost steadied her. "Why didn't you show me this before moving my things?" There was no decision to make. That sentence chilled her more than the threat. "You decided my home for me. I secured you. You relocated me without asking. The cottage can't be protected fast enough. Then we could have discussed options." Lucian's expression hardened with the certainty of a man who had spent years surviving by making decisions before danger finished arriving. "This is the safest place for home. For you. That's not the same as being mine." He took one step toward her. Nora's body braced before she could stop it. Lucian saw something in his face changed at once, but not enough to erase what her nerves had already decided. "You watch me give Tank a choice every day," she said quietly. "You watch me wait for him at doors instead of dragging him through them. You are not a dog. Then why did you assume I'd be easier to move?" Silence. The suite looked expensive enough to suffocate in. Lucian closed his eyes once, briefly, like a man taking hold of himself by force. "What do you want?" "My things back in the
cottage. It isn't safe. Then I'll leave the estate." His face went completely still. "No." The word hit the room wrong. He heard it too. Nora set the cottage key on the marble counter. "I'm ending the contract. That clause referred to employment. My private life doesn't require notice." "Nora, please don't use fear to make obedience sound reasonable." That landed. She saw it. Lucian's hands closed once at his sides, then opened. "I'll have Leo take you anywhere you choose, one driver." No escort beyond that. Every instinct in him seemed to hate the sentence as it left. Nora picked a rented room above a bakery in Bella Vista and took temporary work with Eli at the clinic. Lucian sent one message the next morning. "I saw danger and removed your choice with it. I was wrong. Your belongings have been returned exactly as they were. I will not contact you again unless you ask." She read it every night for a week. She did not reply. Tank waited by the empty cottage every evening. Lucian never used that fact against her. He never sent photos, never forwarded reports, never turned the dog's grief into persuasion. He simply sat beside Tank some nights on the east steps and spoke softly into the cold like a man learning. Too late that love without consent could look too much like a cage. 3 weeks later, spring broke into a storm over the lake. Nora walked home late from the clinic under a black umbrella, climbed the narrow stairs above the bakery, and found muddy paw prints all the way to her door. Tank lay outside the room soaked through, one paw bleeding lightly, body trembling with exhaustion and weather. Nora dropped the umbrella. Tank. He lifted his head, saw her, and tried to stand too fast. She was on the floor with him before he managed it. Arms around his neck, face in wet fur, anger and relief hitting so hard together they became tears. "You impossible creature," she whispered. "How far did you walk?" "Nearly 9 miles from the estate." His hip shook beneath her hand. She got him inside, dried him with every towel she owned, cleaned the cut, called Eli, and sat on the floor beside the bed while Tank fell asleep with his head in her lap. Headlights crossed the alley. Footsteps climbed the stairs. Lucian stopped outside the open doorway and did not enter. Rain darkened his coat and hair. He looked at Tank first, then at Nora. "Is he hurt?" "Cut paw. Overworked hip. He forced the east gate when lightning killed the lock." "You followed him?" "Not close enough to make him run." Water gathered beneath his shoes. He remained in the hallway as if the threshold were a question he had no right to answer for himself. "May I come in?" Nora looked at him for a long moment, then at Tank, asleep between them. Then back at the man who could have taken 3 steps and never been stopped by anyone in the city but was waiting for one word in a rented room above a bakery. "Yes," she said. Lucian entered, wiped his shoes on the mat, and sat on the floor across from her. No performance, no defense ready in his mouth, just honesty. "Tired enough to stop posturing. I thought protection meant removing every risk," he said. "That is how I learned to stay alive. I did not understand that safety imposed can feel exactly like captivity." "I told you." "You did." His eyes lifted to hers. "I heard the words. I did not change the instinct." Hearing is not the same as changing. The storm moved farther down the valley. Tank slept between them, touching both. "I'm not returning to the estate as your employee," Nora said. "I know. I want the cottage only if there is a real lease in my name." "There is. I keep working at the clinic." "Yes. If I start my mobile rehabilitation service." "You do not buy it from me." A flicker, almost a smile. Painfully specific. "You can invest only if I ask. I will dislike those documents." "That is not a no." "No," Lucian said quietly. "It isn't." He reached into his coat and set a key on the floor between them, not in her hand. "The cottage is yours whether you return or not." Nora stared at it. "Why?" "Because I had no right to make the first place you felt safe belong to my permission." Her throat tightened. She picked up the key. "Come back tomorrow," she said. Lucian's gaze held hers carefully. "To discuss the lease? And dinner? Separate invitations?" "Do not make me revise them." A tired warmth entered his face. "Tomorrow," he said. Months later, Nora signed the lease on the cottage with her own name and opened Ellis Mobile Canine Care with savings, clinic hours, and a painfully negotiated loan Lucien swore was insultingly protective of her independence. Her first client was an old shepherd who had bitten 2 groomers because no one had noticed his shoulder pain. Her second was a retired security dog who could not enter vehicles without shaking. Her third paid partly in jars of apricot jam. Tank became the unofficial ambassador of the business. Frightened dogs watched the scarred gray Pitbull lie calmly on a blanket while Nora moved slowly, asked before touching, and proved over and over that big bodies did not have to mean danger. Lucian remained Lucian Ferraro everywhere else. Men still lowered their voices when he entered rooms. Rivals still learned that crossing him had educational consequences. The city still called him ruthless.
And the city was not entirely wrong. But at Nora's cottage he knocked, he asked before changing things. When he forgot, she reminded him, when he became defensive. Tank got up from beside him and went to sit with Nora, which Lucian considered betrayal of the lowest kind on the first cold night of autumn. Nora sat by the fire repairing the loose stitching on Tank's harness, while Lucian stood near the door with his coat on, and all the appearance of a man about to leave. "Come," he told Tank. Tank lifted one eyelid from the rug and ignored him. Lucian looked at Nora. "He has developed selective hearing." "No," she said, smiling as she threaded the needle. "He has developed standards." Lucian moved to the door but did not open it. "And me?" Months earlier, that question would have frightened her. Now it didn't. Now it sounded like what it was. A choice placed gently in her hands. Nora set down the harness, crossed the room, and took his coat from his shoulders. She hung it beside hers. "Stay," she said. Lucian touched her cheek with the same care he had used that first night she allowed him inside. "Are you sure?" Nora looked around the cottage. The uneven table, the kettle on the stove, the lease in the drawer with her name on it, Tank by the fire, already asleep as if the outcome had never been in doubt. Then she looked back at the man waiting in her doorway like he knew what doors meant now. "Yes," she said, "I'm sure." Tank had refused to leave her after one bath. Lucian Ferraro simply took longer to admit he was going to do the same.